Just to remind you all that all attendees will be in listen-only mode. If you have any technical issues, please log out and log back in. Just a reminder, the session is being recorded. If you have any questions, please submit them using the Q&A panel. And please remember to complete the survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. With that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Doug Beimler. Doug, go ahead.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to all of our partners attending today from around the world. We trust that you're all well as we continue to adjust to these uncertain, unprecedented times, and that you're all finding ways to remain connected with all of your colleagues and loved ones. We're excited to share that we have nearly 2,000 participants today from all over the world. My name is Doug Beimler, and I'm responsible for our corporate learning sales organization in the eastern half of the U.S., based out of Boston, Massachusetts. So now as we kick off today's webinar on staying adaptive through crisis, where Professor Francesca Gino will discuss strategies we can all use to embrace constructive rebelliousness in our work and life and become more adaptive and innovative at a time of change. My colleague Laura Chapin joins me today as well, and will be monitoring our chats throughout the course of the webinar and coordinate with Professor Gino for our Q&A later on. Before I introduce today's speaker, I just want to take a couple of minutes to share a bit about who we are at Harvard Business Publishing Corporate Learning, our mission, our values, and how we work with organizations like yours every day to help solve some of the biggest challenges today's organizations are facing by getting talent like you ready for the future of work. At Harvard Business Publishing Corporate Learning, we cultivate the full capability set of Harvard Business School in service of helping you to address your biggest challenges. From large-scale transformation to deep capabilities development to targeted initiatives that might be focused on diversity and inclusion, developing a digital mindset, or creating innovation excellence in your organization. We partner with you to co-create learning experiences that help to develop leaders capable of transforming your business at the speed and scale required to compete in an era of constant change. We leverage multiple learning formats through our digital offerings, blended learning experiences, and on-campus experiences to reach the levels that you need to develop in your organization. Our reach is global, and we've delivered successful solutions for large organizations in 67 countries. Each learning experience that we create with you is powered by the remarkable depth and breadth of Harvard Business School and Harvard Business Review resources, industry experts, and a creative collaborative mindset to bring these resources together to meet your needs. As an organization, we're always thinking ahead about your talent's development needs and preparing them for success. Our co-creation process with clients and our own research and experiments with learners helps us discover new approaches that are integrated into our learning designs and solutions. Some examples of our innovative and innovation experiments include impact of assessments and text messaging to drive learner engagement, shorter burst accelerated learning formats that are sprint-based, new forms of artificial intelligence and AI coaching, virtual reality and augmented reality, as well as audio podcasts. Now I'm so excited and pleased to introduce Francesca Gino. Professor Gino is an award-winning researcher who focuses on why people make the decisions that they do at work and how leaders and employees can have more productive, creative, and fulfilling lives. She is the Tandon Family Professor of Business Administration in the Negotiation, Organizations, and Markets Unit at Harvard Business School, and the author most recently of Rebel Talent, Why It Pays to Break the Rules in Work and Life. Francesca is also affiliated with the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School, the Mind-Brain Behavior Initiative at Harvard, and the Behavioral Insight Group at Harvard Kennedy School. She co-chairs HBS's executive education programs on behavioral economics and driving profitable growth. Professor Gino has been honored as one of the world's top 40 business professors under 40 and one of the world's 50 most influential management thinkers by Thinkers 50. She has won numerous rewards for her teaching, including the HBS Faculty Award, and for her research. Her studies have also been featured in The Economist, The New York Times, Newsweek, Scientific American, Psychology Today, and The Wall Street Journal. And her work has been discussed on National Public Radio and CBS Radio. Welcome, Francesca Gino.
Thank you, Doug, and thanks to everyone who's listening in. I am super excited to be talking about how some of the content of the book really is quite relevant to what we're going through with this crisis. And I want to understand and share with you how some of the ideas are something that we can all draw upon to think about strategies that can help us thrive during this time of crisis. Now, what I want to do with you is share a few stories that can help us really understand how to stay adaptive through this crisis. And I want to start with a story that comes from Italy. It comes from a 3 Michelin star restaurant in Modena, Italy. And it's a story about a family of 4. Imagine the parents, mom and dad, and the 2 boys. One is about 8 years old, the other one is 13 years old in age. And they all visit the restaurant on a Friday night. And when they're walking into the restaurant, they're welcomed by a person who works there in the front of the house. His name is Giuseppe Palmieri. And Giuseppe brings them in at 8 p.m., since that's the time when the door of the restaurant open, brings them to their table, and then he shows up to take the order. And we can go to the next slide so that you can get a sense of what you'd be experiencing if you were to sit in this restaurant. And when Palmieri shows up to take the order, the father goes for a 13-course tasting menu called Sensations. And he has some of the most popular dishes. As you can see, they're quite innovative, also incredibly creative, but a bit misleading. In fact, that dish, for instance, is eel. So maybe not something that you would imagine by eating it. And another one, as the next picture shows, is something that might look like a funny ice cream. But again, it's not a funny ice cream. It's actually foie gras. So again, not the type of dishes that growing boys would hunger for. Now, the father was so eager to eat at this restaurant. After all, it's a Michelin star restaurant that in 2016 became the best restaurant in the world, that not only he booked a table for Friday night, he also booked a table for Saturday night. So it's now 24 hours later, same family is back at the restaurant. And again, Palmieri welcomes them in and brings them to their table. There is again another picture that I can show you of you being seated at the restaurant once again. And when Palmieri shows up to take the order, this time the father goes again for the same order for each of the 4 of them. And this time is a 10-course tasting menu. It's called Tradition in Evolution. And one of the dishes on this menu is something that looks like a soup. It's called Snails Under the Earth. And again, I have a picture for you. And at the bottom of the plate, there are snails, and they're hidden under this foam of raw garlic and potato. And the earth's parts of the dish stands for black truffle, nuts, and coffee. Now, when Palmieri took the order, he noticed almost this face of desperation in the 2 boys, as if they were not really as eager as their father to have another gourmet meal. And the boys were keeping quiet, they were being really polite. But Palmieri turned to the 8-year-old at the table and asked a very simple question. He said, "What would you like to have?" There was no hesitation. Pizza, said the 8-year-old sitting at the table. Now, Osteria Francescana, the name of this restaurant, is no pizzeria. In fact, as I told you, it's a 3 Michelin star restaurant. It's a restaurant where the atmosphere is rather serious. Everything is done with a lot of care and attention to details. And there are also all sorts of rules that needs to be followed. But despite all of that, when Palmieri heard pizza, he excused himself, he ran to the phone, he called up the best pizzeria in Modena and ordered a pizza. And sure enough, about 15 minutes later, a taxi showed up at the door of the restaurant, as the next slide shows, and pizza was served. Now, I'm sharing with you this story because it's a great example of staying adaptive, but it's also a great example of what I mean by rebel talent. To me, Palmieri is showing just that in this moment. In a context where there are lots of rules to be followed, he was able to come in and think more broadly about the mission of the restaurant, about the fact that it's important to create remarkable and memorable experiences for everyone. And he was able to come up with a rather creative solution in the moment. And when he told me the story, he noticed that he only took one changing course and one pizza. Now, when I think about rebels in the business and what I usually hear from people like all of you, when I say, who are the rebels in your organization? Usually the image that comes to mind is not an image like that of Palmieri, but it's more about an image like the one that you see on the next slide. That is the image of the rebels. We think about that colleague who always seems to get in our way as we're trying to get things done, as we're pushing decision forward. We think about the troublemaker, the people we call show-offs or even jerks. And yes, those people exist in organization, but there are also people like Palmieri, people who are fundamentally able to treat crisis as an opportunity, to stay creative and adapt. And those are the rebels that I'm going to focus on in the discussion and in the time that we have together. So we can go to the next slide. And we're going to talk through the rebels with 2 questions in mind. First is what it is that we stand to learn from them that I think is important for all of us to learn and to be inspired by even, so that we can stay adaptive in moments of crisis like this one. But also, how is it that we can create better environments where others can also do the same and stay adaptive and thrive? And when I think about this, I'm reminded of the work of an Italian sculptor and artist. So you might recognize some of his work. So for this one is a really well-known piece of work called La Pietà. And the name of the artist is Michelangelo Buonarroti. He had something interesting to say about the sculpting process. There is a quote that I want to share with you. It said, sculpting is a process whereby the artist releases an ideal figure from the block of stone in which he slumbers. And to me, this quote is really profound when we think about our role as leaders, or our role as colleagues, or even our role as parents back at home, or as partners in our relationship. Is thinking about how is it that we can create context so that people thrive in a moment of crisis. So let's start thinking through what it is that these rebels are really effective at, and what are some of the strategies that we can all implement in this time of crisis. And I want to share with you a story of a coach called Maurice Cheeks. And in particular, I want to tell you something about the evening of April 23rd back in 2003. It was a really important evening for him. It was Game 3 of the 2003 NBA Championships. So imagine being in his shoes. You're in a big arena, 20,000 fans are there with you, millions of viewers ready to watch the game from home. And you're probably feeling really focused on the game, maybe excited, you really want to lead your team to success. And right before the game started, a girl who's about 14 years old in age walked into the middle of the arena, ready to sing the national anthem. And I have a clip of that moment that I want to share with you. So watch the clip and pay attention to what this coach does.
And now to honor America and salute the men and women serving our country with our national anthem, please welcome, as voted by you, the fans, our winner of the Toyota Get the Feeling of a Star promotion, Natalie Gilbert.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the starlight stars? Stars last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. Oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare and gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Now, let me ask you a simple question. Does this guy have a good voice? Now, if you're like me, you're probably thinking, absolutely not. And yet, it took him no time to walk into the middle of the arena and help the girl. It took him no time to show thousands of fans, millions of viewers, that singing is not one of his strengths. Now, in doing so, he made himself vulnerable. Again, in front of everyone, he's showing that singing is not something that he can do really well. In fact, at some point, he doesn't even remember the words. But if you're like me, as you were watching this clip, at some point you felt moved. In fact, if you didn't, you should check your pulse to make sure that there is a pulse in there. When others make themselves vulnerable, they show to us their imperfections. It's actually easier for us to connect with them because we see their human side. We respect them more. Their influence has a much heavier weight on us. And as in the next slide you can see, one of the things that is true about the rebels is that they're willing to make themselves vulnerable. This is really important at a time of crisis where we're working from home, we might not have everything figured out. It's actually quite powerful for others to know that this is our current state and that we share that in common. Now, staying adaptive to crisis and thriving through crisis, you might think, as some of you have asked, might mean that we're bringing more stress and anxiety on ourselves. And the reason why I'm so excited to talk to you about the themes behind the book is that by adopting the strategies that we're talking about, we're actually going to be able to reduce the stress and the anxiety. And more importantly, even help others do the same. So we're truly thriving without feeling more stress. Let me share with you another story. Some of you might be very familiar with this picture. It's a picture of a flight that became quite famous back in a cold evening in 2009. It's a flight that had a captain on board, Captain Sally Sullenberger, who ended up ditching the plane in the Hudson River, 155 passengers all safe. And the reason why he decided to land in the Hudson River is because just a few seconds after he took off from LaGuardia, The plane basically ended up with no thrust in both engines due to the fact that they basically ended up eating a group of geese. So imagine being Captain Sally Sullenberger at this moment. When I learned about this story, what I found most surprising is how he reacted to this crisis. At a moment where he was clearly under time pressure, he didn't do what most of us would have done at a time that it was so stressful and such an important decision needed to be made. He didn't go to the most obvious answer. He didn't go into tunnel visions. Rather, he kept broadening his perspective. In fact, if you were to read the conversation as I did, since it's available for this flight, you would see it, and I think you would be surprised by the fact that he kept considering options. He did that super quickly, but he kept broadening the view. And it was so surprising to me that I reached out to him, and when I talked to him, what I discovered is that by the time the accident happened, he had a ton of experience, ton of expertise, over 30,000 hours of flying experience. He had served in the military, so all sorts of experience flying all sorts of planes. He had served as a volunteer studying previous accidents. So he knew what could go wrong on a plane. And yet, despite all that expertise and experience, he was able to open his perspective, his view, because every time he walked into the cockpit, he would ask himself a very simple question, which was, what could be different on this flight? How is it that I stand to learn something new today? And to me, that was very refreshing, because as compared to a lot of leaders I've met throughout the years who gained a lot of expertise and experience and used it as a signal that they know it all, Captain Sally Sullenberger was using his experience as a signal that there was more to learn. And when we do that, we're able to broaden our perspective. And as you can see on the next couple of slides, this is what rebels like Captain Sally Sullenberger do so well. They keep things in perspective. Now, at a time of crisis, like the crisis we're living through today, this is really important. I've met leaders who are saying, let's just wait for this to pass. But there's also met leaders who are trying to broaden their perspective and try to understand what it is that we can learn from this crisis that could help us be more effective when we're back to a new normal, and they embrace it. They try to find an opportunity in what is happening at the moment. And when we're able, like the rebels, to keep perspective, we fare better. And in fact, we are able to experience less stress and less anxiety and figure out a creative solution like Captain Sally Sullenberger did. So perspective, as this slides can tell you, if we press one step forward, is really important and is something that rebels seem to be doing quite naturally. Now, there is another important ingredient of the rebels that I want to tell you about. And I'm going to share a personal story, if you don't mind. This is something that happened a few years back. It was a time of Christmas, and I had what I thought was the perfect gift for my husband. My husband is a geek, so if you want to make him happy, just buy him whatever new piece of technology is on the market. And on Christmas Day, he was super excited, ran downstairs, got into the living room and found his big box, his present. And he opened up the box and looked inside. And at the bottom of the box, he found a card that let him know that I signed us up for a 10-week course, 2 hours a week in improv comedy. Now, my husband lost his smile right there, and I have to tell you, I started questioning my own judgment for good presents. But then I thought, you know what? As soon as we start going, I'm sure he's going to love it. And so we went to the first class, 2 hours of improv. And at the end of it, I still remember his face. He came running towards me and said, I hate this. Now, fortunately, we had 9 more weeks to go, and it was interesting to see how his attitude changed as we went every week on our date with the unexpected. Now, I'm telling you about improv, and we can go to the next slide, because there was something really powerful about being in that class and doing something new every week, We were being stretched. We felt a lot of discomfort. And that discomfort is something that we usually do not choose. In fact, very easily we fall on routines, on doing the same job, following the same sequence of events every day, because that familiarity, that comfort makes us feel good. But despite the fact that that is the case and that we choose the stability and comfort, when we stretch ourselves, we fare much better when it comes to all sorts of benefits for ourselves and the people who are working with us. And in a sense, this crisis gives us an opportunity to feel that sense of disruptions where usual routines might fall out of the window. And there is a way to turn that to our advantage. Now, I was obviously very interested in understanding how businesses can make sense of this benefit of feeling challenged and bringing in new, given that we don't go there naturally. And so I ended up studying a business called Pulse Sudden Service. And you can see a picture on the next slide. This is a drive-through set of stores. They all very much look like this blue box with French fries and hot dogs on top of their roofs. And what's interesting about Pulse is that they're all about efficiency, doing things fast, as their name states. In fact, just to give you a few interesting pieces of data. First of all, they're incredibly successful. If you look at revenue per square or other measures of performance, they beat the competition by far. They also serve their customers rather quickly. If at a place like McDonald's, for instance, you should expect an order to be fulfilled within a couple of minutes, at Pulse, it only takes 15 to 18 seconds to fulfill an order. Or let's look at error rates. Again, at a place like McDonald's, it takes about, you should expect an error every dozens of orders. At Pulse, there is an error every 3,600 orders. So they're really true to this idea of delivering their service with efficiency, but also without errors. They prepare their people differently in order to achieve that. Again, at a place like McDonald's or Wendy's or Burger King's, you might expect that every worker gets an hour and a half, 2 hours of training per station. But at Pulse, every workers receive 135 hours of training per station. So they really make people feel like experts. Now, that might sound wonderful given the efficiency that Pulse tries to achieve, but you also might wonder whether the work becomes like a routine, monotonous, because especially at rush hour, you're working really fast at your station. And the general managers at each of these stores have thought about that possibility. And they introduce small experiences that try to help people experience some unpredictability, some novelty, like the type of unexpected exercises that my husband and I experienced during improv comedy. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. One, which is super simple. People move from station to station throughout the day, but they actually learn about the order that they're going to follow on every specific day when they show up for work. So it's a very simple way of injecting a little bit of unpredictability on how your day is going to unfold. Also, the store managers, the general managers have challenges for their people. So one of the challenges that I love is a challenge that was given to the person taking the orders at one of the stores in Kingsborough in Tennessee. And Pulse has a lot of repeat customers. These are people who drive through there a few times a week, 5-6 times a week, and we're creature of habits, so we tend to make the order every time we show up. And the challenge to the person in the window was, if you can remember 100 orders in a row, then there is going to be a special reward. And it's something that the person found quite challenging, but also she experienced a sense of pride when she was able to complete the challenge successfully. And so what's important to remember, if we can go to the next slide, is that rebels are people who have this talent for novelty. They're people who embrace discomfort and become comfortable with the uncomfortable. And as I said, the crisis shouldn't be wasted, but it should be an opportunity where we rethink some of our routines. As I told you, leaders and employees in organizations that have been able to embrace this new way of working have fared better. They report lower levels of stress, lower levels of burnout. They seem to be better able to manage the multiple jobs that we have right now as we're working from home. So rather than going with what's familiar, as I said, let's reflect on how, to the extent that we can embrace the new ways of working in a way that might lead for us to find new ways in which we can do our work and actually thrive. Now, I'm saying this recognizing that this crisis specifically is very disruptive. Like many of you, I'm sitting at home in my home office, but if I were to just open the door and leave the office, soon enough I would meet 4 little ones who are running around the house and creating all sorts of interesting opportunities for a distraction, sometimes a welcome distractions. So I recognize that each of us is working under different conditions where we are asked to do our jobs, but also care for others, as well as caring for ourselves. But as I said, getting on the defensive and just letting the stress take over is something that it seems might not be the best answer. If we're able to identify a new routine for ourselves and embrace the new, as I said, we fare better in terms of the stress that we're going to experience, but also the joy that we're all be able to experience. So let's learn from the rebels. There is another element that I think it's important for us to focus on. And I'm going to introduce it by going to the next line and going back to the domain of sports. Now, I'm sitting in Boston, but I am not going to be talking about the Red Sox. What I want to do instead is showing you a short clip of a smaller boy getting out into the baseball field. And let's watch the clip and try to learn from this boy. I'm going to tell you why I think this is so impressive in what he does. So let's watch.
I'm the greatest hitter in the world! Strike 1. I'm the greatest hitter in the world! Strike 2. I'm the greatest hitter in the world! Strike 3. Wow! I'm the greatest pitcher in the world!
Optimism. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Now, in addition to showing optimism, one of the things that this little boy does, which is incredibly important, is that he shifts his attention rather quickly from a potential weakness, making it a potential strength. And I don't know about you, but a lot of examples that I can think of my own life as well, of the life of many employees and leaders that I've studied, is that there is too much focus on weaknesses. In fact, sometimes we even overinvest in our weaknesses. But if we're able to focus on our strengths, on what gives us joy, again, we fare better. I want to tell you about a couple of examples where I was able to use this very simple principle in researching collaborations with other organizations. So if we go to the next slide, we're gonna travel to India to an organization called Wipro Technologies. And Wipro came to us with a big problem. At the time, they were hiring a lot of people into call centers and seeing that many of them, after a lot of energy and time was put into training them for 6 to 8 weeks, they would get into the jobs and about 45, 60 days later, they would leave. And when we talked to a lot of the people who were leaving, the experience and the narrative was the same. We felt as if we were asked to check our identity at the door. We had to follow scripts. And so we use this as an opportunity to do things a little bit differently. In collaboration with WePro, we revised half hour of the first day of their welcoming process. And in that half hour, we asked people to reflect on what makes them unique, what their strengths might be, and how is it that they could show up with more authenticity in the work that they did. And when we went back 7 months later and looked at the effect that that simple intervention did, I think the data speaks for itself. This is the difference that we saw in turnover rates. So people who had that moment of reflection ended up being more authentic in their job and playing to their strengths more often, such that they were more likely to be with the organization longer term. They also felt much happier about their job, and they also developed better relationship with others and performed better on their role, as we know from ratings on the customer calls. Now, this is not just about WePro. In fact, on the next slide, we're going to travel to a different type of location, pitching competitions across the United States. What we found in that context was similar. Authenticity pays off. When entrepreneurs were more authentic in their pitching, they were also 3 times more likely to get money for their ventures from the venture capitalist. So authenticity helps us perform better. It almost calms us down in moments where we feel the pressure, like moments of crisis. Now, authenticity is also important because it allows us to persist and persevere when we experience challenging time. If we go to the next slide, you're going to see a chef that owns the restaurant that I mentioned to you earlier, Chef Massimo Bottura. His story is fascinating because he ended up going to a context, traditional Italian dishes, and fundamentally reinvented them. Now, I don't know how much you know about Italians, but I can tell you that a few things are true. First, we cherish our old ways, especially when it comes to recipes that have been passed on for centuries. And also, there are all sorts of rules when it comes to cooking, from the way you pair certain type of pasta to certain type of sauces. I'm married to an American, and to this date, my husband doesn't understand why every time he has pasta with a fish-based sauce, he can't put Parmesan cheese on top of it. You can't do it. You're breaking the rules. And so in this context, Massimo Bottura did something new. And at first, as you can see from this quote, tradition-bound Italians weren't too happy. And when I asked him why is it that he persisted, he shared with me a story that is all about the power of authenticity. As you can see from the next slide, he ended up spending time at Il Bulli, a Michelin star restaurant at the time. And what he learned from the chef and owner of that restaurant is really captured quite nicely by the quote that you're going to see. And it's a quote about making him realize that he had to rethink his dishes to really bring out more of his signature strength, more of his voice, more of his own authenticity. And after that summer, that's exactly what he did. He went back to Modena, where Osteria Francescana is, and he rethought some of the dishes so that he could stay true to his own ideas. And sure enough, after a few months, the first Michelin star arrived, and the second one, and the third. And as I told you, in 2016, the restaurant became the best restaurant in the world. And his story tells us something much broader about the power of authenticity when we meet challenging times. It allows us to persist, to perform better. I found that this is true across all sorts of organizations going through moments of crisis. But I thought that I would just mention a quick study that maybe it's more fun given that I'm sitting in Boston. And it's a study where we invited Red Sox fans to come to Harvard Business School. And we gave them wristband to wear at the start of the study. Some of them received wristband of their favorite team. Others received a wristband of a rival team. And that is just enough to make people feel very authentic in one case and very inauthentic in the other. And then we put them through all sorts of challenges where we knew they would fail. One of them at the end of the time we had together was a physical challenge, putting their hand in a bucket of ice and see how long they persisted. And across all of these challenges, we found the same result. those who felt authentic, in this case because they were wearing the wristband of their favorite team, fared better, persisted for longer. Even when it came to the time that they spent putting their dominant hand in the bucket of ice. In fact, you can look at the next slide and see a difference in terms of the time they persisted. And so one of the things that is true about the rebels, which is the reason why I'm sharing this story, is that rebels have this authenticity and they rely on it and they bring it forward. Rather than doing what most of us do, which is conforming to the ideas and behaviors of others, rebels have the courage to bring their contributions forward. And to me, there is no time better than a crisis to really reveal ourselves. And some leaders and some employees have been doing that, bringing their authenticity and contributions forward. So again, if we're able to see this crisis as an opportunity, we can use it as a moment to reset ourselves and really stay true to these talents. If you think back to the quote that I shared with you from Michelangelo Buonarroti, one of the things that this quote should made us think of is the fact that we can all start with the assumption that there is great talent in ourselves and great talent in the people around us, in our work life and in our personal life. And if we take that perspective, I think that we're going to have an easier time really embracing these talents and also do the type of sculpting that I was talking about earlier. Now, there is a final element that I want to talk through with these rebels, which to me is a really important one, but is one that is somewhat puzzling because we are born with it and yet it disappears as we grow older. And it's curiosity. If you look at the data, curiosity peaks at the age 4 and 5, and then it declines steadily from there. And that, I think, is a really sad result because curiosity is so important for staying innovative, for better decision-making, for developing deeper relationship at work and in our personal lives. And when I first saw this data, I was upset, but I was also puzzled. And I thought, maybe when we get into new jobs, maybe when we get into new roles, curiosity pops back up. And I collected data to see if my intuition was right. And I have to tell you, I was wrong. In fact, curiosity is very high, usually across industries, across roles, across jobs, when we start new jobs or new roles. But then when you go back to the same people 9-8 months later, curiosity had dropped at least 20% across the board. It's almost as if we get into the usual way of working and curiosity is squeezed out. Now, some leaders, some organizations think about this differently. And I want to give you 2 quick examples. One is from Intuit. Intuit has innovation awards every year. And innovation awards goes to people whose explorations led to a new product. But they also have failure awards. And the failure awards goes to people whose explorations did not lead to a new idea or a new product, but led to important lessons for the group or the firm. And the important part is that the failure award comes with a failure party. So it's not just lip service to the idea of keep experimenting, keep staying curious, but intelligent exploration is actually rewarded, is celebrated. Very important. What we know is that when we stay curious, we don't see stress as something paralyzing. We see stressful situation as an opportunity. And so it's so important for us to retain that curiosity, especially in a moment of crisis. Now, another example comes from the restaurant that I mentioned earlier, Osteria Francescana. It's a very busy night at the restaurant, and one of the sous chefs, who is known as Taka, is working on the last dessert of the night. And Taka is working on arranging all the pieces on the plate, and all of a sudden the tart dropped to the floor, and now you have a smashed tart. Massimo Bottura walked into the kitchen and saw the mistake. Now, many leaders in that role would have started yelling at the mistake. But Bottura didn't. And in fact, he looked at the plate on the floor, and then he looked at Taka and he said, "Taka, I think we have a new idea for a new dessert." And sure enough, they came up with a new dessert. It's a deconstructed lemon tart, and is now the most popular dessert at the restaurant. And the picture that you see here is the picture of that new dessert. The name of it on the menu is, Oops, I Dropped the Lemon Tart. And to me, that's a remarkable example of the opportunity that we all have to react to accidents or mistakes that others are making, or that we ourselves are making, and try to see that opportunity. Rebels do that on a regular basis. They're people who hold on to the curiosity and sense of awe that they had when they were little kids. And they are also people who help others do the same. So this is a really important talent to remember. And as I said, especially in a moment of crisis, is a talent that can help us feel less stress and see the opportunity. Now, if I take a step back, all of these talents come together in an interesting recipe. The talents that I see these rebels use consistently are these 5 rebel talents. Rather than going for what's familiar and comfortable, they stretch themselves and they choose novelty. Rather than getting into the usual way of working and taking things for granted, they have the same type of curiosity and awe that we had when we were little kids. Rather than just looking at problems from one view, they broaden their perspective, like Captain Sully Sullenberger did at the time of the 2009 flight. Rather than conforming to the behavior and views of others, they have the courage to bring out their authenticity. And there are also people who push back on the stereotypical views and judgments and rules that society often put of us, and they really leverage differences. And so let me end there before opening up for questions and share the story very quickly of one organization that really stood out to me when it comes to leveraging differences. It's pirate ships in the 16th century. At a time when it was about 200 years before slavery ended in the United States, they were the most diverse organization on the planet. They were hiring people not because of their gender or race, but because of their skills and their commitments, because of their different ideas, their willingness to work together and really leverage their differences. And again, often they were sailing through very turbulent seas, and they were able to leverage those differences and different ways of working and thinking in a way that allowed them to be successful in their missions. But there is another reason why I loved learning more about the pirate ships, and is the fact that the ships were organized in a really interesting way. The crew was in charge of choosing the captain, and the crew could also remove the captain pretty easily if the captain was not behaving well towards the crew. And when I learned about that, I learned also to ask myself a question on a day-to-day basis, and is the question of, am I the captain that my crew would choose as his leader today? And I think about this question in my work life, in thinking about the people I work with. I also think about this question in my personal life, in thinking about my family, my partner, my spouse, my children. And I think it's a question that can help us really think through whether we're doing enough to model these rebel talents for the people in our life or the people we work with, but also think about whether we're creating the conditions for them to thrive. And as I said at the beginning, I think that there is no better time than this crisis to think about these talents as a way for us to create better condition to embrace this new situation and actually not experience as much stress, but try to focus on the opportunity that provide for us to rethink about the way we approach our work and more generally the way we approach life. So let's go to the next slide and share my big thank you for all of you and spend the last few minutes that we have together to address some of the questions that might be on your mind.
Wonderful, Francesca. Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you for your fantastic insights, great stories, and loving the sense of humor that also shines through, dealing with these some of these tough challenges and how people have reacted. And so we're seeing a lot of great questions coming in. So the first thing I'd like to do is thank all of you, of course, for your engagement and inquiry, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. And the first theme that came up, Francesca, is about the nature of being a rebel. Can you comment a bit on what the nature of being a rebel is? Is it more of an innate characteristic, or can it be learned and taught? And if so, how do you learn to be a rebel or encourage that in your own people on your team?
Absolutely. So a big motivation for me for writing this book, engaging in this really 10-year project, was the belief that we can all learn to be better rebels. In fact, I am still learning how to be an effective rebel. One point of to start really on the journey is to understand what among these talents come more easily to us. And so I prepared the test that it's a free assessment. It takes just a few minutes. It's available to people to take. It's called the Rebel Test. And people can find it at rebeltalents.org. And it's a test that, again, presents you with some questions. And then after a few minutes, when you're done, it gives you a rebel type. And by the way, if you turn out to be a pirate, no worries, it's a very good thing. It's a good rebel type. And based on some of the stories that I shared, hopefully you're seeing that. But the test also gives you some feedback of where to keep your attentions going forward. So in working with different leaders, different organizations, different employees, that has been a really good starting point to try to understand by default where to you fall, and having a little bit of an idea of how to move going forward. And so it's definitely a journey, something that we can all rely upon and develop.
Wonderful. Thank you. And another question, there was a real theme around, you talked a bit about stress, right, in these current times and adapting and this nature of resilience to be a rebel. So it's a two-part question. Can you offer some tips on how do we care for ourselves as leaders so that we can thrive and have that energy to continue to challenge status quo? And how can we help take care of our people so they can do the same?
So to me, these are really important questions, and we can't be effective in caring for others if we don't care for ourselves first. So what I try to work on, that I've learned and I've been inspired by leaders who have done this at time of crisis, is really keeping curiosity in mind and keeping perspective. If on a day-to-day basis I wake up and I think about all the suffering and the many different ways in which the world is changing and the many different ways in which people are being hurt by the current crisis, I almost feel paralyzed. And so I try to broaden my perspective and think about what are the opportunities? Where is it that I can help? Or what it is that I could do differently to go through this crisis and become a better person, a better mom, a better spouse, a better HBS professor. So I've been thinking a lot about that on a day-to-day basis. And I bring this into focus with the idea of curiosity. So on a day-to-day basis, I have some learning goals. What it is that I can learn today, how I can create the space for that. And it could be anything from learning how to analyze data differently by taking some tutorials on YouTube to learning how to make special glue for projects with my little kids. And so it's identifying learning goals that I added to my performance one. I think those are things that we can do for ourselves that allow us to experience less stress at this time of crisis and then help others have a similar experience.
Wonderful. Some terrific advice there, I think, for all of us in these times and beyond. I know we definitely have at least time for one more question I'd like to focus on is when you think about the different cultures across the globe, how might being a rebel look different? What might those expectations be, and how might that look different across different cultures around the world?
So I only shared very few stories from the book in the time that we had together. But what I did intentionally when I was working on these projects is travel across the globe from place to place, from the best restaurant in the world to fast food chain in the middle of Tennessee or other parts of the world. I went to call center, I went to Pixar. I explored all sorts of places with different cultures, both organizationally but also because of background. And I did that intentionally to say, we all have the opportunity to embrace constructive rebelliousness if we are thoughtful about it. Yes, some culture may make it easier or more difficult, but if we all take it upon ourselves to embrace these talents more often and to really think through these opportunities for sculpting, I think that no matter what the culture is, we can be successful in the effort. And I've had enough evidence now to say that that is the case. In fact, one of the organizations that I spent some time studying is an organization where the culture is all about don't rock the boat, highly bureaucratic, very hierarchical, and change happens quite rarely. And it's a group in the Air Force. And the reason why I went there is that a new leader came in a couple of years ago and said, look, if we really want to be successful, we need to think differently. And he really embraced all of these ideas that we discussed that rebels have, and the amount of innovation and great decision-making that came out of the group in the last 2 years has been remarkable. But this leader did something really important. He didn't wait for others in the organization to change. He thought about his span of control, where he could make a difference, and then he took action. I think we all have the power to do so.
Fantastic. And I think on that very uplifting and motivational go-to action, Francesca, we'll start to close out our session today. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your questions. Some terrific engagement, and we're sorry we can't get to all of those. We will make sure that the recording is provided to everyone within 48 hours. You'll get that over email. So that concludes our session today, and we thank everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Francesca.